Hi people. Anyone who's been following my channel for a while will know that there's no domestic issue I feel as strongly about as crime and justice. Um, of course, there's other important issues. Healthcare is important, infrastructure is important. Those are all big things as well. But I feel very, very strongly on this subject, and I believe this country could do so much better. Now, a while back, I made a video talking about why Britain is comparatively safe. And what I was focusing on was homicide rates in this country. I stand by that because it's true. I mean, Britain is not Honduras. It's just not. It's not South Africa. The average British city is a lot safer than American cities of similar size and smaller. Um, so I do stand by that. That is actually true. One thing regarding murder, though, and manslaughter, I have noticed that there are cases where the charge is deemed to be manslaughter when really it should be murder. For example, if you have a teenager or a gang of teenagers who stabbed someone to death in a frenzy and then they're charged with manslaughter, that is irrational. I mean, you do not stab someone repeatedly because you want to give them a warning. You know, that is an intention to kill someone. So, would that change the statistics drastically? I don't know, but I do think there are manslaughter cases that really should be murder cases. Now, I want to talk about Nigel Farage's speech. I'm not sure precisely where this was, um, but it was a speech on crime and what reform would do about the problem. And they've pitched their case by saying that Britain is lawless. It's hard to argue otherwise. There are clearly serious problems in this country regarding um, how justice is dealt with. Now, before I get into this, I want to directly address anyone who is a Reform voter or a Reform member, because I have been critical of Reform, and I'm in no rush to vote for Reform. I am saying right now, very candidly, that I feel so strongly about this issue that if I really, really believed that Reform would get this right, I would almost be willing to put aside the other concerns that I have, the other differences of opinion with Reform that I have, and I don't know if lend my vote is the right term, but I would almost be prepared to vote for Reform if I really believed they could carry the through. Um, so, you know, often I see Reform voters say vote Reform and they don't really give much basis to that. What I would say is if you would really want to win people around, then you need to listen to people like me who might actually be prepared to vote Reform, but you can't just get knee-jerk reaction when there is criticism. For example, I do not trust Reform on foreign policy. I don't like the way that has a sycophantic friendship with Donald Trump. I don't trust Reform on Russia. And I think that a total halt on immigration isn't really workable. Um, you know, I think that punishing Filipino nurses or people who are coming here legally and just conflating them with illegal migrants. Because I think Reform wants a complete halt on immigration. That is, A, I don't think it's workable, and B, I don't think it's fair. Um, I understand the frustrations on this issue. I'm certainly not living in a bubble. I do think we need to get hard line on illegal immigration. I think we need to get hard line on foreign criminals in this country, and people have a right to be frustrated about that. Um, but for instance, if you just ban all immigration to this country, that's going to affect people who, for example, have a foreign spouse. Now, why should they be punished for falling in love with someone? That to me seems a bit, frankly, heartless. Just because Reform wants to be tough on immigration across the board. As far as I'm concerned, if someone's contributing to this country, if they integrate into the UK, there is such a thing as positive immigration. My issue with Reform is they don't sort of see positive and negative immigration. They just see all immigration as bad. And I don't agree with that. So I'm just putting my cards on the table. That's why I don't fully, that's why I'm in no rush to endorse Reform. Um, but it has to be said, when it comes to crime, Reform has consistently taken a tough line. Farage has personally taken a tough line. There's no denying that. I mean, I would, if it was solely on this issue, I'd have to say Reform is probably the most hardline party. Labour and the Tories talk tough, but they've both completely failed. The Tories are supposed to be the party of law and order. They had 14 years to get it right, and they didn't. Labour, okay, you can give a bit of allowance for the fact they've only been in government for just over a year, but again, they send out mixed messaging. On one hand, they talk tough. On the other hand, you have early release of criminals. You have vows to build more prison spaces, and yet, releasing criminals early, talking about more community sentences. You have the prisons minister who I've probably given too much attention to, but he literally said we punish too many people in this country, and yet Starmer and Cooper talk tough. So I think Labour sending out mixed messages on crime, that's not good enough. Um, Unquestionably, there is two-tier justice. This isn't a far-right conspiracy theory. It's hard to get away from that when you get the Lucy Connolly case. The wife of a Tory councillor who made an inflammatory post online. I think it was appalling what she said, and I do think she should have faced some sort of punishment for that. But I do see now why a 3-year prison sentence for her, yet you get far left figures at Glastonbury inciting violence, and nothing happens to them. There is clearly double standards at play there. You get violent offenders who get lesser sentences than what Lucy Connolly's got. Now, I don't totally agree with those who think that she shouldn't face any penalty. I do think inciting violence isn't harmless. So, to my mind, she should have got perhaps a hefty fine or lengthy community service. I don't think she should have got scot-free. But, it's hard to argue against the claims of two-tier justice in this country because there is evidence for it. And Labour's attitude so far is just to deny it, just to say it's a far right conspiracy theory. It really isn't. A lot of people feel that there is something fundamentally wrong. I'm going to just highlight some of the things Farage mentioned in the speech. It wasn't a very long speech. I'll put a link to it. It was literally about 12 or 13 minutes. Um, he mentioned that successive governments, including Labour, have mentioned the crime survey have shown that crime has went down, but he points out that that's false data. Now, if that's true, then yeah, the government is misleading people. He pointed out that trust in police has went down um, because you have a situation, for instance, where the public, yeah, it taps into this thing about two-tier justice, two-tier tier he spoke about. The fact that the Manchester airport case took a long time to go to court, where you had these violent thugs beating up police officers in airports. I've heard what their excuses are. I don't really buy it. I saw the footage. It's pretty clear they attacked the police officers. Um, and the Lucy Connolly case immediately went to prosecution. Labour have absolutely defended that, which frankly looks political. She's the wife of a Tory councillor. This is a shocking statistic, and if it's true, I mean, this is even worse than I thought. In London, 1 in 3 people have been the victims of phone theft. 1 in 3. I mean, London's about 9 million people. That works out at around 3 million Londoners. Um, if that figure is accurate, that is absolutely appalling. That's like New York in the 80s. That's like New York City in the 80s. I mean, that is absolutely appalling. Nigel Farage said he personally knows someone who actually had a tracker on their phone and they presented this information to the police. The tracker tracked that down to a location in Buckinghamshire. Nothing was done. Nothing was done. Farage cited Rudy Giuliani in New York City. Giuliani is often credited with bringing down the crime rate to low. His police commissioner at the time, um, I forget the guy's name now, but Giuliani and the police commissioner in New York were credited with the broken window policy. This was basically treat so-called small crime seriously, and then it kind of trickles upwards to the big crime. In other words, if you crack down on so-called petty crimes, it has an implication on bigger crimes, and it did actually have an effect. New York City became one of the most dangerous cities in North America to one of the safest in just over a decade. So that Bill Bratton was a police commissioner. Um, in this country, we have the opposite situation, whereby literally, if you have thefts in shops that are less than £200, the police will do nothing. Now, the police need to explain this. They might say that their resources are stretched. Why then, and surprisingly, Farage didn't mention this, why are they spending resources on non-crime hate incidents? No one can rationally argue that spending time on that, sending six uniformed officers to parents who have got into online feud with their school, isn't taking away resources. It's an absolute disgrace. So, the police, frankly, in many cases have themselves to blame for the lack of public trust, when they are just failing to deal with crime. Small shopkeepers, I have so much sympathy for them because the losses that they face from criminals who are acting literally with impunity, literally getting away with it. In broad daylight, I remember seeing some thieves at a Greggs in Gateshead. And the point is not that it's just a sausage roll. That isn't the point. It's the point that it's a crime and they're acting with impunity. I actually said to the assistant, look, I saw which way they ran. And they said, it's a complete waste of time, mate. The police will do nothing. And people might argue on the grand scheme of things, it's only a sausage roll, but it's this issue of criminal impunity. I mean, what's to say, okay, it's only a sausage roll? Well, it's only an iPad, it's only someone's phone, it's only someone's car, and then it elevates upwards. So that's why it matters. Reform has vowed to cut crime by 50% in its first 5 years. That's an incredibly ambitious goal. Um, and he sent out a message to criminals, either obey the law or face justice. Would increase stop and search, fast track arrest, to build more um, custody spaces in prison cells. 30,000 more police, I welcome that. Drop diversity roles in the police. One big issue, of course, is how to pay for all of this. Well, if you drop diversity roles, that means you're not paying police representatives who would pay paid for those roles. So that could be one area where it's paid for. This thing about paying for it all is very, very important. Um, and that's what every political party has to answer for. Political parties can make grand plans, but they have to pay for it. Now, would Reform pay for this? For example, in other areas, for instance, further benefit cuts. So would Reform go even further in benefit cuts that would disadvantage disabled people? I mean, they need to answer to that. For instance, they're not saying they would do that, but how are they going to pay for this? So, is it going to be a situation where disabled claimants are punished even further in order to fight crime? I would be very uncomfortable with that sort of situation. So they need to explain that. Farage mentioned armed forces, ex-armed forces getting into the police. I've mixed views on that. Definitely, we do need tough police. It's a tough job. They face real risks, but this is a balancing act. You want police officers who are empowered to do their job. You want police officers who don't fear prosecution because they've arrested a hardened criminal. You don't want police officers who are dragged before the courts because they have taken action to protect the public, such as the Chris Kaba case, which Sadiq Khan disgracefully still attended a vigil for Chris Kaba, despite the police being largely cleared in that incident, despite evidence that their lives were indeed threatened. Chris Kaba was a violent criminal um, whose record spoke for itself. So I do want a situation where the police are empowered, but and Farage has to address this point. There is rotten apples in the police, and you don't want people like Wayne Cousins or what's the other guy, Carrick, forget his first name now. who are rotten apples and who get away with crimes because they are police officers. So it's all very well empowering the police, and I support that. But you also must have a situation where police who do cross a line, police who are corrupt, um, are kicked out and themselves face criminal prosecution. I mean, this is really not rocket science. How much is it to ask that the public have decent police officers who arrest criminals but are not themselves corrupt and are not themselves breaking the law? I don't think that's unreasonable. I mean, there are corrupt police officers where there's been miscarriages of justice. More often than not, it's been from police officers who have been corrupt, um, have forced confessions and so on. Um, so I'm a little bit wary about calls to have the officers in the police. Yeah, we want tough police officers. I don't want to see woke police who think that the answer to policing is, dancing at pride parades and taking the knee. I want to see police officers who frankly scare criminals. Um, but you don't want, I don't want a paramilitary police who think the law doesn't apply to them. And that's something Farage needs to be careful about because if yeah, we want empowered police, but you don't want paramilitary police. You don't want police who think that wearing a uniform makes them immune from justice themselves if they do cross a line. I mean, my goodness, this is not too much to ask for. Let's just get back to basics policing. Chief Superintendent of Greater Manchester Police had actually been calling for this for a long time, back to basic policing. Unfortunately, he ruined his own argument by saying we will crack down on non-crime hate incidents. So he was a breath of fresh air, then he ruined it by saying he will, police that aggressively. That was very disappointing. Um, Farage pointed out that 50% of magistrates' courts have closed, so opening up them would help deal with the courts backlog. That's a major, major issue in our justice system. Career criminals, this is an extremely important issue. 10% of crime in this country is perpetrated by 50% of criminals. Now, it is absolutely illogical, insane, reckless, dangerous when a career criminal appears before a judge and they avoid a custodial sentence. I think that, and Farage did not address this point, but I think judges who do not jail career criminals need to answer to the public. If all career criminals were jailed tomorrow, I think we'd see a drastic drop in crime, without question. Um, Farage says that reform will ensure that sexual and violent offenders serve a full term. I absolutely welcome that. There's absolutely no sane reason why someone who's committed a violent, destructive offence get out halfway through their term. That's morally perverse. He's speaking about Nightingale prisons, like in the pandemic, there were Nightingale hospitals. There is an overcrowding issue. Recently Labour spoke about opening new prisons. Just words until it happens. And that would be welcome if they actually fill them with dangerous criminals. But again, Labour sends out mixed messages. Starmer said he fully supports Lord Timpson, the prisons minister, who said that we punish too many people. So it's just a mixed message. Timpson clearly is in favour of building more prisons. So who's Starmer listening to? He says he fully supports Timpson. So mixed messages from Labour. Deporting foreign prisoners, Farage pointed out there's over 10,000 foreign nationals in British prisons. This might be the most controversial aspect of his plans. He's talking about sending them to El Salvador. Not specifically foreign prisoners, but sending the worst prisoners to foreign jails like in El Salvador. Um, well, that would be popular, certainly, but I think it's one of those things that sounds grand and it would be popular, but it might be harder to implement. Denmark actually does this. They have a scheme with Kosovo, which was new to me. And surprisingly, for a Nordic country, Danish jails are filled to capacity. Um, but they have a scheme with Kosovo. Well, yeah, it's ambitious, but look at how the Rwanda scheme panned out. It fell flat. So having deals with other countries is all very well. There's a few things with that. Firstly, you would need to be 100% sure those people are guilty. I mean, Trump's deal with El Salvador has run into problems precisely because there are people whose very guilt has come under question. Um, Salvadorian prisons are basically human battery farms. President Bukele has come under scrutiny for that because in many cases it's questionable whether there's even due process. In El Salvador, if you're accused of being a gang member, you can go to those prisons. I I think that MS-13 gang members absolutely belong in prison, but there has to be due process. Someone's guilt has to be 100%. And Farage is sort of contradicting himself here. He has actually personally put question marks on the Lucy Letby case. Well, okay, but if you're now being populist on the worst of the worst, you need to be damn sure that they are 100% guilty. Um, so yeah, that's the gist of his speech. I'll put a link to it in the thing. The one thing I want to say about all of this, the rhetoric's all good. I welcome tough rhetoric, but that's the point. It is just rhetoric until we see action. My big question for Nigel Farage and reform, if I had one question, I mean, I'd like to have more than one, but my one big thing would be, okay, you're a politician, you're talking tough, but how do you change the legal establishment? Because Nigel Farage, as a politician, knows full well that legislators have limits. Successive Home Secretaries and Justice Secretaries have talked tough, but that Farage must know this. If they try to change too much, judges and the Sentencing Council whine about interfering with the judiciary. So my question would be, how, for example, do you hold soft judges to account? If a judge is failing to jail a career criminal, how do you hold that judge to account? Recently, we've had televised verdicts um, in sentencing. That's welcome. It puts a bit more scrutiny on how sentencing is reached. But I still believe that judges are not anywhere near accountable enough to the public. I don't say that every single outcome is wrong. I mean, some sentencing is actually quite tough. You get, for instance, certain cases, murder cases, where you get a minimum of 28 years in prison. That is actually pretty long. I mean, for example, the guy who killed three members of his family got a minimum of 49 years. The reality is that really is a life sentence. There was some controversy that it wasn't a whole life tariff, but let's face facts. He's behind bars for half a century. So it's not a case that every single sentence is soft. I don't believe that. But I would say that in too many areas that the public care about it is. I mean, I would argue violent youth crime. When you have teenagers acting with impunity because they know that their age protects them, there's something fundamentally rotten about that. 15-year-old who stabbed the elderly gentleman to death got 7 years. 7 years for taking a man's life. I would say that should be a minimum of 15 years. Had he been an adult, I would say a minimum of 25 years. I'm not saying he should get the same sentence as an adult. I am saying it should be a lot tougher than what it was. And the girl who filmed it didn't even get a custodial sentence. That's perverse. So I do believe judges are not living in the real world in many cases. The Scottish Sentencing Council, in their grand wisdom, actually believe that if someone is under the age of 24, because they claim they've done research that shows someone's brain isn't fully developed, even though even though you can get married, you can vote, you can join the armed forces, you can drive, start up your own business in Scotland, if you're under the age of 24, you will be seen effectively as a minor. Shame on the Scottish Sentencing Council. Of course, Farage, what he's talking about will be England and Wales, because in Scotland, this is a devolved matter. So, it's ambitious, but my big question for reform is, okay, you're a political party, you're talking tough, you can put forward legislation, but how do you change the legal establishment? How do you get judges to be more accountable? Will you abolish the Sentencing Council? I personally, if it's not to be abolished, it should at least be a hell of a lot more accountable. They say they do public consultation. I argue that public consultation is limited. On their website, they're very complacent. I think they have a big segment on sentencing myths. So I think the sentencing council feels, oh, everything's good. We don't need to change too much. Or where change happens at snail pace. I don't think they really understand the fact that public are livid. So many people out there, I would say definitely the majority, feel our justice system is just not fit for purpose. On too many occasions, on too many crimes that people care about, it lets victims down. If someone has been drink driving or reckless driving and they kill someone or seriously wound someone, they will get a prison sentence, but inexplicably, they don't get a lifetime driving ban. Now, ostensibly, the reason for this is so they don't take to illegal driving. Threaten them. Threaten them with instant jail if they do. Again, so much of this is not followed up by the threat of justice. Rehabilitation's very important, but it has to be a deterrent. And that aspect of justice to me has been largely um, underserved in this country, especially when it comes to youth crime. So there's those areas. There's career criminals, youth crime, dangerous driving. Those are three areas I would say have been largely abandoned. Actually, domestic violence, I would add to that. You get far too many examples of thugs who beat up their girlfriends or wives and they get a couple of years in jail and that is it. And then they come out and they kill them. To put it bluntly, that's what happens. Um, so there's a lack of consistency and justice. In summary, I do find what Farage is saying refreshing. I'll say that. There's areas I do not trust reform. I do not trust reform on foreign policy, and I don't agree with their absolute calls to just halt all immigration. I don't agree with that at all. But frankly, if they can carry out some of this stuff on crime, then I might even vote for them because I feel so strongly for on this issue. The fact of the matter is, Labour and the Tories can talk tough, but they failed. The Liberal Democrats and Greens cannot be trusted on crime. The Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey was talking about, he was complaining about the BBC not holding Farage to account. Well, my question for Ed Davey is you say you're a Liberal, what have you done to speak out against the use of non-crime hate incidents on people's civil liberty? As for the Greens and crime, I would never vote for them in a million years. The Greens are absolute loony left when it comes to crime. If they had their way, prisons would be completely abolished. They are the last party I would vote for on the issue of crime and justice, followed by the SNP. The SNP is also extremely weak on this issue. The record in Scotland is pathetic. Um, Sadiq Khan's record in London is pathetic. The situation in London with phone theft is appalling, absolutely appalling. The sad truth is, this is a good time to be a criminal in Britain. And this is not to say Britain is like South Africa or Honduras. It's not. But there is far, far too much impunity. The fact that a criminal can go into a shop and steal, and as long as it's under £200, the police will do nothing. The police need to address that. The police need to stop being so damn woke, stop wasting resources on non-crime hate incidents, and get back to basics. They have to stop complaining about, well, the media makes us look bad. No, it's your decisions that are making you look bad. And it is true that sometimes the police have their hands tied. For instance, firearms officers in the Chris Cabot situation, they're going to not do their job if they feel they're going to be prosecuted for doing it. So I want to empower police officers. I want to see them empowered. But it is important to get balance. I don't want to see rogue police officers who think that their uniform gives them a right to act with impunity. You don't want misogynists in the force who will abuse their power um, to, exploit women and so on. They need to be absolutely purged from the forces. The same as if, they have a track record of holding racist attitudes and so on. That's not too much to ask. And it's really not rocket science when it comes to the police. I don't think the public are asking too much. Back to basics policing. Police who stand up to criminals, who have the power to make arrests, um, and know that when those criminals appear before a judge, their efforts are not in vain, but not police who are, going to abuse their power. I don't think it's unreasonable to call for that balance. I support the Crush Crime campaign, which was partly initiated by Dr. Lawrence Newport. Reform has endorsed that campaign. So yeah, Labour can talk tough, but they're sending out mixed messages. And if Starmer and Cooper don't get rid of non-crime hate incidents, and if they don't take this issue of judiciary justice seriously, they cannot really claim to be serious on crime. And with that, I'll leave it there. We'll see what happens. Reform's got the rhetoric right, but I want to see more detail. I want to see how really they will do this, and specifically, how will Farage and Reform change the legal establishment? You can talk tough as much as you want as a politician. How does that change judges? How does that hold judges to account? I would say one way is to have absolute minimum terms to force judges to impose those sentences. So they cannot claim their hands are tied. So they have to impose those sentences. So for instance, if someone kills or seriously injures a person through dangerous driving, if they're drunk or they're driving like a maniac, um, an absolute starting point should be, say, 10 years. That way, judges have no choice but to impose that sentence.